Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Ana Rato of Ramos Pinto House, the Ramos Pinto Port House. Introductions in just a minute. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasting, and sponsored by the original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and Sweet series of wines. Hey, have a listen to Xavier Sanchez coming out this week from Pichon Baron, which was one Pichon Longueville Baron. An incredible conversation about second growth Bordeaux in its history. But not while we're here to have a conversation with Ana Rato of Ramos Pinto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. It's a
Well,
pleasure.
we've had these little technical difficulties this morning, so we've had a great conversation already, but I'm happy you're here. And I learned a lot already this morning from tasting the ports that you brought with you, so we'll have those conversations about that. But tell me about your trip to America. What's on your schedule this time around?
So this is this coast this time of the year. I always like to come back for 2 years. I've been out of visits, and that makes a great pleasure to come back. So I did Denver and Seattle, which I absolutely adore, and Portland, and now LA,
Wow.
which is amazing.
That's
and,
busy stuff.
Oh yeah, and now I'm still going for San Diego. So.
Oh,
nice
well,
trip.
okay. Well, you might see my sister's name down there. She's a judge. Hopefully you don't have to visit
Hope
her.
not. Hope not.
So, but that's a good question. We didn't talk about this. It's been a couple of years since you've traveled, and we all know that COVID was very good for businesses like mine in regards to direct-to-consumer sales. But how was COVID in Portugal? Was it restricted? Was it like France, where you had to sign out of your house to get out? And then how was business during COVID?
Well, it was tough, I think, like anywhere else. But I think COVID affected a part of the business that we were seeing coming and growing, which was tourism. We got to develop that part of business. Us and other companies in the Douro, having a lot of visits, a lot of guests, and then out of a sudden, everything stopped. So, I mean, in terms of the sales, also was really pretty. It hurt really, really hard.
It was really hard.
Yeah, it was.
Like shipping. I mean, now we're dealing with logistics and getting inventory to the States and getting it on a boat, and I personally don't understand it. Why it's changed so poor. I don't know if it's just the backup and the fact that nobody wants to. I don't get it. Nobody seems to want to work anymore, and the people that are working don't seem to really care about what they're doing. And so she laughs at me because she knows it's true. But it's been very difficult, actually, for us. Post-COVID has been much more difficult than COVID.
Well, at least challenging, because now that we are ready and we're traveling and everything is as normal as we could get. Right. So we want to be with the wine.
Yes,
and want the wine to travel.
We do.
Although I have to say that we were having a lot of tourists back, and I still remember going to the office and the streets were empty, which is kind of weird because we are in front of the river, which is a beautiful part of Vila Nova de Gaia, which is opposite to Porto City, and it was nobody. So it was very interesting now to see and grow and see people coming, and actually sales are very good now in Portugal. But we need to have the wine.
It's got to get around.
Yeah,
It
so
was
that's
spooky.
a challenge.
It was spooky going down the street. Well, let me for the listeners, I want to lay the land. And somebody said once in an article that I read, ever since I started studying wine, my world geography has grown considerably, and I would vouch for that as well, because I'm finding all these wonderful places where wine is being grown now. But Portugal is contiguous with Spain, the northwest of Spain.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And then so now we have regions like Vino Verde and Douro and the port where port is made. So tell me about the Douro Valley in relationship to the rest of Portugal.
So Douro Valley is the northeast of Portugal.
Well, northeast. So off the coast, not really near the coast.
No, no. Actually, that's why it is a microclimate, because it has a protection of some mountains from the climate of Atlantic, from the west, and from the bottom, from the south. Also, we have the biggest mountain that protects and makes it a macroclimate. And this region is about 60 miles east of Porto, so it's not far away.
No, it's not that far. Yeah.
Nah. And it's very beautiful because it's very diverse in terms even of climate. It is divided in 3 subregions because of the rainfall also, which is a bit different, and the landscape.
So it's fascinating to me that this is my 32nd year of doing this, and it even is more interesting to me than it was when I started. The evolution of areas of under vine, which is changing again because of climate change. But it's just interesting to me that a place like Portugal, where it's tucked away, you're at the base of this mountain, you're not too far from the coast, but you are far from the coast, and all of a sudden you're making a very indigenous wine, which is, we'll talk about how it's made here in a minute, but it's a very specific wine. And it's like, how do these pieces of ground evolve into these very special things? Do you know the history of why Portugal?
Well, I think Portugal has an amazing variety of indigenous grapes. So I think when the Romans came and brought the winemaking, we start experimenting what we have.
Oh, so the Romans did this, huh? They're everywhere. These people.
Oh, absolutely. So we are very fortunate to have that legacy. So we actually used a lot of the techniques that they brought, and we still, to our days, we still have a lot of companies that use the same kind of techniques, like the lagars, and the indigenous grapes being so many, especially in the Douro, for example, we have more than 80 different reds and more than 30 whites. So it gives you. It's like to paint to make a painting. You have so many colors to choose that your neighbor will do a different wine from you because it just has different colors to choose from. So it's kind of
interesting analogy. That's interesting because the first wine we tasted tonight was a still wine.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit about how in 1993 we went to France, we went to Vinexpo, my father and I, and we went to the Portuguese booth. And the still wines in 1993 were very difficult to swallow. And, you confirmed that idea, but it was a very unique character. And I think still wines from Portugal become very popular.
Yes, I think we always like I said. What I said is we always did still wines. The thing is, we were famous for the ports, but we started to sell them. The first Ramos Pinto started to sell the first Duas Quintas in 1990, and from then on, we started to improve the quality and diversify the amount of wines that we did. So we did the Reserva, we did the red, the white, with indigenous, always because we believe that the indigenous grapes are the ones that really talk and really say what we are going to present, what we want to present. And then over time, from just last year, we launched, we got deeper as we know and study the region and our grapes and our terroir. We could focus and get like a photography of certain parts, like parcel wines and the single estate vineyards, like Quinta d'Erva Moira that we launched last year, and this year we launched Ortiga. So these are wines that we are very eager to produce from now on and to present because they're versatile and they're not just ports.
It's a unique profile. I mean, we were talking about the grape Sazao, which is a very popular grape. It was very popular for domestic fortified wines in America back in the day. But when you say 1990, which is sort of when you began at Ramos Pinto producing a still red wine, that's rather young in the history of wine.
Yeah.
But as far as I've been reading, port has been around since the 1100s or the 12th century, maybe even more. So it fascinates me. So how did it become that this was a fortified wine? Why they were making still wines? Obviously, at some point they were making still wines for some reason, and I want you to explain that. They started adding brandy or distilled spirits to it, and so why?
The story relates to a year that actually it happened naturally. You know, it is a very dry place and a very hot weather. So sometimes the probable alcohol of the grapes is very high. So actually it's very easy for the grapes to become high degree of alcohol.
Yes.
You know, so actually what happened is that back on those days the wine couldn't endure for more than a year or something. So people at that time that had happened, they said, wow, so this is what makes the wine stay for good. So they try to replicate. So, and then because of obviously the English being crossed with the French and wanted to have some wine, with our alliance, the oldest alliance between the Portuguese and the English, they came to Portugal to look for the wine. And actually we started to sell this wine that could travel and could last. And that's how we became to fortify the wine.
So by adding, and
brandy.
It's basically brandy, distilled grape juice, distilled wine.
At 77 degrees,
It punches up the alcohol content, which is basically a stabilizer and a... what's wrong with my brain? There's a word I'm trying to find, but the wine now can travel.
Yeah, preserves and
preserves. That's the word. Yeah. There, way to go.
Yes, preserves is actually what we are looking for. Is a quality of the. It's a big quantity of the part of the wine. So it has to be a good brandy. So it's a neutral brandy. In our case, we want a neutral brandy because it's just exactly what you say. It's just for preserving the wine and
it's so interesting that the English were back in the early days of all these industries. Champagne was one of them. That was their thing. The Russians and the English wanted their champagne, and now the English wanted their port and their sherry to be shipped, and it wasn't going to make it. So out of nowhere comes this, out of the need comes this new drink, and there's a reason in the world, in my opinion, of food and wine, why these things land and where they land. Like Portugal-based port is just got some pedigree about it, and there's some history about it. That when you drink it, you feel like you're part of this history, as opposed to a domestic port or an English port or not English port, but an Australian port, port-style wine. The history doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's one of my fascinating things about, I think, and attracted me to work with wines, is that port wine is absolutely unique. The aging potential of those wines, a vintage port, is unthinkable. And probably there are Tokai also that has that.
Sure.
But port is... we go to the cellars and we find these wines from 1880 and 1840 and they're still amazing wines that you can enjoy, and that is stunning to see that all the history of the world has passed and those bottles were lying down in the cellars waiting to be opened or blended in other wines, either if it's Tawny's or just a vintage port. It's quite special, I think.
I'll have to show you the bottle before you leave it. I can't remember if it's Quinta Noval or another house. It's not in here. It's in my office. But my father was there, and he bought a bottle of 1900.
Oh, my God.
And we opened it when all the computers were going to crash in 2000. We waited, until that whole thing. We were going to both share this thing, and it was unbelievable wine that had a glass life of maybe 15 minutes. Once the oxygen got to it, it just started to fall apart. But that first 15 minutes, you're like tasting history. I mean, it's like, right? It's such an amazing feeling that only wine can do, whether it's port or still wine. Only wine has that sense of a place.
Yeah, exactly.
And a sense of time as when this thing was made. So for the listeners, we've got this beverage now. Let's just say it's from around 1100 to the English figured out that they needed to fortify what would have been still wine. and add to it so that they could bear the travel to England, and it becomes a worldwide sensation to people. But there's lots of different styles of port, and that's a huge question among my customers when they see what we carry. And so we're going to walk through these a little bit. We have Ruby Port, Tawny Port, we have Vintage Port, we have Colheita Port, we have White Port, we have late bottled Vintage Port. And so these are confusing things to see on the shelf.
Yeah, well, that's true.
For you too,
I
guess.
I have to say, yes. But the nice thing is that what you were saying earlier is that the reputation of port was established with the vintage port, which is kind of nice because it represents the history and the capacity of aging. But then as our habits and our consumption and the food we like changed, also I think the consumption on ports is changing a lot. I can see that, for example, the white port is something that people are now trying more, and they start to know white port, which was not very common outside Portugal. I have to tell you that for now, I was reading that the second nationality to visit Portugal at this moment are Americans. So
Really?
yes, so I actually came to make this trip, and I got a lot of people asking me, "Oh, I want white port. Do you have white port?" Because I tried that white port in Portugal, and I tried the tonic port tonic, and I really like it. And we don't have white port in the States, so this helps people for one with how to drink, and helps them recognize the different styles. Then another thing is the food and what it also helps on the consumption and the shift the consumption. The tonies are now port wines that are more fashionable to drink at a dessert, and so because they were now served chilled, people enjoy them better than in the past. In the past, I suppose the vintage were drank by men in their clubs, and now things changed, thank God, and now we have a broader way of showing our wines.
With our cigars, we're at the club.
With
Women aren't allowed in there. We're only men. No kidding. So I'm going to touch. You said something very important, and I want to touch on it. And then we'll go through the list of wines so people can understand. But you said that people are visiting Portugal and they're tasting white port. Let's just say it doesn't matter whether it's white or vintage. Doesn't matter. They're traveling there, and they're tasting, and then they come back to the States or wherever they go back to, and they say, I can't find the port I want. I don't remember seeing Ramos Pinto on the shelf. And so that ties into a question I have for this conversation, that is, how are we educating consumers around the world that port exists? Because every time I port at home, people ask, what is this? And then isn't that just we're just out there hand selling, hand producing, hand explaining things? And I think that you answered that question already by saying that. But then the next question is, I can't tell you ever at a restaurant being presented, I get port lists or late, that now they put whiskey on there too after dinner drinks, but having a somm say, hey, you ordered the creme brulee, or you ordered that, you really ought to have a glass of this. That's not happening. I haven't seen it happen, but have you seen a worldwide awareness of port?
No, I think there are some markets that are more aware than others, but I think there is, and you're right, there is a need for constant work with sommeliers, and actually we have kind of an agency in Portugal that is trying to bring sommeliers for all over the world, and make them taste and make them know about the wines and about our wines from port. And that takes a little bit of time. I'm used to be a hand sell. We are a small company. We just do the wines with our grapes, so everything is hand in our company. So, but it's a work that we do that we have to do regularly, and that the somms really, they never get a bad experience when they open a bottle of port, and that's amazing. I've never came with a customer that I'm showing the wines that they say, "Oh my God, this is I prefer this one or that one," but I'm amazed by the quality of ports, and really ports are sometimes people look at the pricing, but if they go to Portugal and they see the landscape and they see that it's all hand-picked and it's all these hilly and very steep vineyards and with very, very low yields, you kind of give more value to what is inside of the, for example, a 20-year-old, they have wines from 1920s.
Wow.
And so there are wines that you have to keep in your cellar to be able to blend them like 3 generations from now. So it's quite interesting. It's quite humanized, like the Tonys are quite humanized wines.
Let's talk about those. So if I was to bring somebody to the table the first time, we've never had port before, we're having dinner at my house, and I pour a ruby port. What am I pouring when I pour a ruby port?
So there are 2 styles of red ports, the rubies and the Tonys. So the ruby is the reductive ambience. So it's a wine that we want to give the fruit and with the dark color. So what happens is when we produce them, they are all ruby style. But then because we put them in different oak vessels, let's say, they become different things. So a ruby that stays in big oak vats, in big quantity of wines, the color, the contact with the wood is small, so the color stays and the fresh fruit stays. So
but they do see wood. A ruby port will see wood. It's not stainless steel only.
No, it can be wood.
Okay. But it's sort of neutral wood.
Yes, but also we always want old wood into the ports. We never like new oak. It's something that 70 years old wood. It's really what the older the better. We don't want to give anything from the wood, and especially Ramos Pinto. We want the wood to be just a vessel to age and to take care of the wine until it is sold. We want to show our fruit, and we want to show the character of the aging of the wine. So a ruby will be fresh fruit. It's very nice with dark chocolate. It's very nice with even a steak.
A steak?
An LBV would be amazing. An LBV is a late bottle vintage.
I gotta try that.
Could be with a pepper steak or
wow.
with a roast duck. It's really
duck I can see.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And of course the traditional pairings like cheese, obviously. Whereas the Tonys are totally different. So after we produce them, then they go to small oak barrels, and I mean when I speak about small, it's like 650 liters, so really small, a lot of contact. So it's like oxidative ambient. So it has a lot of contact with air, so the color fades, and you start to have the aging kind of fruits, the dry fruits. It's very interesting how these 2 worlds go apart.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
So you have, just to back up just a little bit, unlike apparently it's the ancestors of wines, fortified wines from Portugal, we introduce the brandy during fermentation to kill the fermentation, leave some sugar, and then elevate the alcohol content, as opposed to, apparently in its early days, they would make the wine and then they would add the fortification later. But in this case, so we've arrested fermentation. We now have this wine with some residual sugar as well as elevated alcohol content, and now we're going to treat it depending on whether it's ruby or tawny. So if I'm at the market and I see a tawny port without any designation of number of years, what would be then the average age of a regular tawny without a 10-year, 20-year, or 30-year moniker?
So a regular tawny would be 4 years.
4 years, okay.
Yes.
So that's been in barrel for 4 years.
Yes.
So then I see next to it, now I'm playing consumer now. I look at next to it and it says 10-year tawny. What does that mean to me?
So it means that the average age is 10 years. So the style, it's not just the average age in terms of mathematics, but it's also a style. So whenever you do any bottle of port which has the stamp from approval from the Institute of Port Wine, it means that all of the samples have been submitted and approved. So it ensures the quality that is inside is from actually port from the Douro region.
So every bottle, every bottle, every batch has to be or vintage,
approved
whatever,
by yes.
Wow,
yes,
that's a lot of work.
Oh, it is. Oh, it is.
By somebody, anyway.
and then when you have a sample, for example, of the 10-year-old, you submit the sample, and there is a chamber of tasters that obviously do the maths to see if everything is fine. But also, as important as that is the style. So the style has to be the color, the profile, the organoleptic profile has to match what it is a 10-year-old. And so on and so forth with the other styles.
So just for the simple math would be half in a 10-year, half the bottle would be 20 years old, and the other half would be 0 years old. Would give you an average, but well, you don't. It's not like that. But
but
the concept is the same.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is also that relates with the style of the house.
Right.
Having said that, about your farm is different from my farm, so I have a steeper slope and you are facing north, so my wine with different grape varieties than yours, I will have my style and you'll have yours. And that's the richness again of port wine. There is a lot of good companies producing port wine and with different styles.
So that makes sense. So your job as the master winemaker is to ensure the consistency of that house's style.
Exactly.
But we still, and this is create another question: how important and how much effect does terroir have from year to year in affecting that consistency? In other words, my 10-year tawny, or let's say my ruby, since that's going to be reflective of the vintage at the time of that it's made. How important is terroir for that?
It's hugely important, and we've noticed it because we have 900 acres of land, and we bought in two different places, in two different subregions of the Douro, and Douro Superior is completely different terroir from in terms of, obviously the soil is still schist, but it is different what it gives, and again because of also the age of the vines. So all of these variables have a lot to do with the style of the wine that you're going to produce. And each company defines its own. Sometimes there are companies that are more raisiny or more on their, for example, or the tawnies, and ours. One of the things that I like people to recognize about Ramos Pinto is the consistency on the quality of its wines, because again, it also relates of the people that you have in your tasting room. So we have Ana Rosas is our master blender. She's still part of the family that founded the house, and she's been there for 30 years, and she's in charge now. But she went on learning from her cousin to be able to become master blender, and she and all the team that she has also becomes from parents to sons. They come there and they taste, and this ensures also the consistency of the style through the ports, and this is very important.
That's very important.
Very important.
That sort of gives you that. It's part of the story, right? That's part of the story that makes you say, "I like this Ramos Pinto 10-year tawny because this is that story plays out in the profile of the wine."
Yeah. Also, I think one of the things that is very specific with us is that we try to do as much as we can wines that relate to a place. So our 10-year-old, for example, is from Erva Moira, because the grapes come from Erva Moira, and this is like 40-year-old vineyards, and we want to give these we want to show a lot of fruit and good intensity. It's kind of like our teenager port, whereas the 20-year-old is like our young adult. So it's vines with 80 to 100 years old, so you get more complexity, and that's what so we want to call a 10-year-old Quinta de Moira and a 20-year-old Quinta de Bom Retiro, because it's that specific terroir that we want to show.
I think, it's the more we get into, and certainly with any still wine from all over the world, I'm seeing more specific, vineyard specific things. They're now in Mendoza, they're working on very specific vineyard cultivation, because they want to start showing the various terroirs you go up the side of the Andes. And I think it's a really important thing. And I think for the consumer, I think it's how in our industry we get away from all the stuff we see on the markets. And I hate this. Well, I shouldn't say that. It brings people to the wine table that maybe wouldn't have come before. But now that we get them there, we need to show them.
It's very important what you're saying. That's the thing that we want to bring these different things and different approaches, so people can experiment these insights that we do to our terroir. The thing is, we need, and in our case, we need to hand sell and explain a lot and get them to know and to visit. Visiting is one of the things that we use a lot for people to recognize the value of the wines and the terroir specific to the Douro. But otherwise, it's very difficult to in the world so diversified. But then again, there is space for, as long as we have people that have these programs like you, Paul, and the chance of getting the wines to the market, bit by bit, I think people get amazed by the quality of the ports.
The way you're speaking, and I'm thinking to myself, something just hit me. It's a very cerebral, it's a very brain-related product. It doesn't have to be for everybody. In other words, you get to study as much as you want to study. You want to learn more about port, and we're going to talk a little bit more again about some of those different styles, but you don't have to learn it if you don't want to. But you will hold that glass and realize there's something unique about this.
Yeah.
And just tasting through your 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, and just for the listeners, when we say that means on the 10-year, the average juice inside is 10 years old, the average for the 20 is 20, and the average 30, obviously 30. So you got to imagine that if you had a 30-year tawny, some of that juice could be 60 years old, which is fascinating to know. And that's a very cerebral academic thing to try and understand. But when you hold that glass and you go, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff, there's a reason for that. And that's what we want to teach people about, the reason. So if I have it, I've got my tawnies now. I've got my ruby, I got my tawnies. Now there seems to be 3 different types of port that might have a date on it. You have the actual declared vintage. I want to explain that, the consortium declared vintage. Then you have the coletas, and you have the LBV. So let's start with the declared vintage for the whole region.
Okay, so vintage is like the king wine from the Ruby family kind of style. So it means it's done in absolutely outstanding years. It's only produced in outstanding years. When and within the category, there is the vintage of the house, and there is the single quinta vintage. It means
so when you say that the outstanding vintage, what's the definition of an outstanding vintage?
Outstanding year.
Okay,
so
and who
it
does
means that the quality of the grapes, if you have your estate, you look at what happened during the year, and you saw that the grapes were developing well, and you had a good quality of the grapes coming to your winery. So you did the wines. In the end, you think and you look at it, and wow, it's an outstanding. So
what does a consortium do about that? The group of
then after doing your wine, your friends from other companies do the same. They might have a good year like you, but they might have a problem in and didn't do it. Okay. So they submit the samples to the institute, and when we have more than half of the producers, it's considered a classical year. So like a general declared,
half of the producers,
half plus one. It's declared a general declaration of vintage port. and that means that overall in the whole region it was a good quality for most of the producers. However, there is one or two that didn't decide to do it because they didn't have.
And when you label a vintage port, a declared vintage, that we're 50% plus one of the houses are exceptional, you just put on the label vintage port?
Yes.
Nothing else?
Nothing else.
Just vintage
It's
port?
vintage port.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm in the market, again, playing Mr. Consumer, and I see a bottle that says late bottled vintage, and there's a number on there, 2017, for instance. What am I looking at?
So that is LBV can be traditional or modern. Modern is filtered, traditional is unfiltered. Us, Ramos Pinto, we just do traditional vintage, traditional LBV. Sorry. So it means that it's not filtered. It's in our house is done like a vintage port, fermented in lagar, and then the difference between LBV and vintage is just the aging. The LBV goes 4 years in big oak vats, and vintage goes just 2. So I'm going to
stop there for a second. To me, of all my knowledge of port, of all my years of tasting, totally flies in the face of what I thought it was. In other words, what you're saying is that a regular vintage port is more ruby-like because it's not in the barrel for so long, and the LBVs, late bottled, I mean, that's been hanging around for a while, vintage port. But can you declare your own vintage for an LBV? I mean, in other words, the consortium doesn't have to declare the vintage?
No. You can declare pretty much most of the companies do an LBV every year.
Every year, okay. So
we don't.
You don't.
We actually, in a decade, sometimes we don't have one or two, depending. But it's just that you can do and submit the samples of what you are doing in your terroir, in your estates. Then it has to be approved by the institute.
So if you want to do an LBV, you still got to go to the institute.
Yeah.
But you and anybody, Keith and Naval, they could do it if they wanted to, and maybe they do it every year, maybe they don't, but you don't. But late bottled vintage at the store is not vintage.
No.
Okay.
No. And it means that the LBV is more rounded, so it's more for consumption.
So it's more tawny-like. Not necessarily?
No, because it's still very dark and it's still very red fruits.
I see, okay.
That's what we want. It's still big oak vat, so the color is still, the ambience is still reductive, so you still get the same style of fruit. However, the ability to age is different, and it's more ready to drink, if I can say it that way. It's more ready to drink. So it's a more approachable, let's say, wine from the Ruby Salmon. Well, on the other hand, the vintage port is, because it just stays 2 years, so it's half the time of the LBV, the aging potential is much longer because it will age in the bottle.
Is this the one when I chill? This is the one I put a little slight chill on when I serve it? Or not?
Not necessarily. I like them always a bit
room temperature.
a bit chilled.
A bit chilled,
but not too much. Otherwise, it would kill. But yes, I prefer always to serve the wines, all port wines, a bit chilled. The tawny is a bit more than the rubies, but
okay. So now
room temperature is something that changed a lot.
Yeah, right. And you're right.
So it's a big question. It's one of, there's two things that I think they're super important for port, and crucial for having a good experience in port is like the glass when you have them, because I think you respect more the wine if it's like a white wine glass, not these small wines that these small glasses that you cannot smell. Or,
so you're saying don't
taste.
use a cordial glass. You want to use a regular wine glass.
That's
interesting.
I would love a white wine glass because tawnies you need a wider.
Yes, you need to get the nose
because of the to breathe. Whereas the ruby or the vintage port you can have, depending if it's a young or an old. You need so I think the white wine glass is kind of,
I'm gonna have to do that
balanced.
Tonight. I've never done that. I have a whole set of cordial glasses at my home, and I pour that little thing. And
sorry,
and now I think this is great. I want to test that.
And then the other thing is temperature. Temperature is, serving a port wine room temperature just kills it. Back in the old days,
room
room temperature was like freezing cold.
Right.
Not here, obviously, but most all over
Romans.
the world. Yeah, the Romans.
They're stone
so
houses.
it came a long way from being cold, our houses. So I think it's better to chill your wines and serve them.
So it's interesting though, because I think it's an interesting problem for a restaurateur, for instance, if he has a beautiful, Bordeaux, and I don't like them too chilled because you lose the character of a red wine, and then the acid pops out and the fruit gets dissipated. And so, but somebody orders it and you go to the cellar to get it, it doesn't have time to come back to what is now room temperature. And so I end up tasting a wine that may not be in its best presentation because it was in the cellar. Yeah. But here, a wine, which is red wine, port is red wine, you want a little bit of a chill. What is that?
I think if you do the same treatment of red wine for the LBVs and the vintages, you'll be fine.
You'll be fine. Okay. All right. So now there's one more vintage that I remember now, the Colheita.
So Colheita is we have been not producing Colheitas for a long time. We have produced in the past, but not for a long time. It's like the vintage for the Tawny family. Okay, so it's like it has a date, and normally, actually, sometimes it has two dates, which is the date of the year of the vintage, and then it has the date that was bottled.
Mm.
Okay, so normally the Colheita
but you can create a Colheita.
Again,
you have to submit it, but anybody can create a Colheita at any time they want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's the vintage.
It's the vintage from the Tawny
side
family.
Okay.
Yeah, true.
So it's aged for a while. Okay, that's fascinating. All right, so that makes sense to me now. This is great.
Cool.
I'm glad. I'm only doing this for my own edification. I don't care if anybody's listening or not, because now I understand it better, and that's great. And then we tasted at the end, which I thought was really good, was this 2002 vintage. When was the last declared universal vintage in Portugal?
So it was 2017. We normally, from the last, since the 60s, I think normally is like 3 to 4 years of general declared vintage ports in those outstanding years. Of course, like I said, each company can produce either single quintas or just vintage ports from the house. So it's very it's very versatile, this category on because you can have vintage ports, old vintage ports that you keep, or you can drink them young. And this is something that also changed during time, because you used to wait to drink a vintage port like 20 years to have a mature vintage. And now I think because of overall what everybody did in terms of vinification, actually Ramos Pinto started to vinificate and have an approach to vintage port to make it accessible, like the 82 and 83s. They were very, you could drink them and be very elegant and very pleasant, and then it would age beautifully because they are still in the market and drinking very well. So it changed a bit the way that people thought about vintage, thank God.
Yeah.
And now we have more approachable
I'm
vintages.
Way more educated than I was. So if I open a bottle of port, these are 750 milliliter bottles that we have in front of us. What can I expect? Because it's fortified, because it's higher alcohol, what can I expect for the regular palate to start to notice oxidation? Like a couple of weeks, couple of months, year? How long can I leave the bottle open?
No, the vintage and the LBV, since it is a reductive ambient, you have to treat it like a red wine.
I see. Okay,
so
you gotta
either you have a Corava or you
nitrogen or argon.
Yeah,
or something.
exactly. That's That's the thing. The tonies, no, the tonies they are used to air. So actually, the type of cork is different that we use. So you have a tea cork
Right, right.
for the tonies bar top. So you can leave it open for a month or and they will
Because
be
that's
fine.
750 ml of a bottle of port is a lot. I think it scares a lot of people away because they're worried about you're not going to drink a whole bottle. Maybe around my house you might, but not necessarily, not necessarily here.
Well,
Um, interesting.
certainly that's why I think there was a bit of a shift for the tonies, because the tonies can be left open, they can be served more chilled. So I think they're more gourmet oriented than the rubies. Although
So
the
if I'm
rubies
the
are
if I and I we're already at
amazing.
45 minutes, which is hard to believe. Of course, we had a little delay, but I want to ask you one last question before we get you on the road. If I come to the Douro Valley and I have a meal at your favorite local restaurant, how would I what would I see there compared to, let's say, a meal in Vino Verde? Would it
In
be
the
different foods?
Well, it's a very tricky question because Douro is one thing and Porto is another thing. So the food from the Douro is a bit different. So in Douro, you would find like kid and this is, do you say kid? It's like the baby of
A
a
cow? Veal? Goat.
goat.
Oh,
Yes,
goat.
thank you. It
A
is. So,
kid.
yeah. Sorry.
No, it's great. So the goat's a popular meal.
It was small. So it's a very traditional from the Douro. You would always find codfish, of course.
Yeah.
You have fish from the river. Um, you have lovely cheese, and like these kind of I don't know. I don't like to say chorizo, but it's kind of these
Sausage.
sausages that we do in the Douro also.
Oh man.
But it's funny because we are a very small country, but we have such a diversity on food.
Really?
And also the herbs that we use are totally different the north from the south because we had more influence from the Moors in the
Right.
south. So type of herbs are incredible, the difference and the
So interesting.
yeah, we like to use a lot of different things. Like we could complicate more your program by saying that we have such diversity of grape varieties that we use in different ways that could
That's good. Let's
we
complicate.
can
Let's,
complicate we can
let's
complicate a lot,
complicate it.
but make it interesting. Make
Is
it
it? Is it? Would you consider the culture European in particularly contemporarily? For instance, if you go to Budapest or you go to Hungary and you see that when the Russians left, they've just left this wake of old Europe, and now they're trying to battle back. Do you see restaurants being more international and the culture moving in a direction that's more universal, like the New World, so to speak, compared to its indigenous Portuguese roots?
I thank God I see both.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of international, and I think we always will have a lot of international because even chefs want to experiment with international things.
Right.
But thank God we have a lot of amazing chefs and a lot of Michelin star restaurants of chefs that decided that, and like us, producers of port, we want to do things differently. Otherwise, why would you come to visit us if we were the same as anyone
Good
else?
point. That's that's sort of the question.
And that's how our food, and I think it's very interesting because you see the traditional food made in a special way, in a modern way, but it's still our food. We have amazing fish, we have amazing meat,
And,
vegetables that are accessible and local, so it's kind of really nice.
Since the company is run by the family still, but it's owned by the Louis Roederer, do you have large guest quarters there that that we could visit? Anyway,
No, we actually have. We were bought in 1990, but I think Roederer knows that wine is about culture, and they know that we had to make what we are doing in the same way, with the same culture. So they kept the family very, and we still have the family running, and we still have the same spirit. So it was actually a good marriage. So we do have a place to stay.
Okay, all right. That's should ask that first, and then the interview would be over. It's such a pleasure having you here. We're going to get you on the road. Just really fun, and I hope you have a successful rest of your trip.
Thank you so much,
and,
Paul.
Travel safe, and we're going to Portugal is on the list of our travel plans in the near future. I haven't been a chance to visit Spain as well, so
we'll be glad to have you and try our wines there, taste our wines there.
Yes, let's do that. I look forward to them. We're bringing in the white still wine for our club, and certainly during the holidays, we'll be bringing in some of the ports.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.